बुलेटिन में खुशामदीद। अभी आपको बताएं, अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के सेक्रेटरी जनरल एंटोनियो गुतेरेस इस्लामाबाद में मौसमियाती तब्दीली के हवाले से तकरीब से खिताब कर रहे हैं।
Sustainable Development Goals. Agreed by all United Nations member states 5 years ago, the Sustainable Development Goals are interlinked and an holistic blueprint to end poverty in all its forms and to build the kinds of societies that we will be proud to pass down to future generations. The goals cover the whole spectrum of human progress. They target poverty, inequality, hunger, and health. They addressed key topics such as the quality of the education, decent work, a just economy, gender equality. They deal with climate change, with the oceans, biodiversity, and the natural environment on which we all depend, and makes natural solutions to be a central aspect of our strategy. And they promote justice, strong institutions and partnerships that will enable all countries to progress sustainably. And let me emphasize, all countries. For the Sustainable Development Goals are relevant for every nation and every community. No country can say that it has no inequality, or no urban poor being left behind, or no problems with pollution or climate change. And no country can say that it is immune from the global forces that will affect its success. Today's challenges to sustainable development and human progress do not respect borders. They are not confined to individual nations. They demand collaborative answers that recognize that we all share the same planet and we need to cooperate across borders and sectors to realize our aspirations. And I'm pleased to say that Pakistan has embraced the Sustainable Development Goals from the start. Back in 2016, Pakistan was among the first nations to integrate the SDGs into its national development agenda and recognize them as national development goals. And in 2018, Pakistan launched a national SDG framework to prioritize and localize the global goals through the country. And as with the goals globally, poverty reduction is at the heart of Pakistan's effort to leave no one behind. A national poverty alleviation program, titled ESAS, or Compassion, has been launched to expand social protection and safety nets and to support human development. And the National Youth Development Programme, titled Kamyab Jawan, is seeking to create 10 million jobs for young people in 5 years. And stunting and malnutrition are down, and the nation is seeing success in bringing down neonatal mortality, thanks in large part to the Lady Health Workers Programme, which has been a significant increase in skilled birth attendance. And I'm also encouraged by the country's initiative this year to promote universal health coverage. These are just some of the many actions being taken by Pakistan and other nations to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Everywhere we can see progress, poverty and child deaths down, access to energy, education, and decent work rising. But whether we look at Pakistan or elsewhere, we can also say the pace of change is not yet fast enough. In Pakistan, you are grappling with major challenges relating to HIV and polio, environmental degradation, and providing education, skills, and jobs for all in one of the youngest countries in the world. And globally, the story is similar. We are off track globally, especially in the areas of hunger, inequality, biodiversity, and climate action. Gender inequality in businesses, in homes, in schools, and in government, in the technology sector, is denying women and girls their rights and opportunities across the world. And vulnerable populations, such as migrants, young people, and persons with disabilities, remain at risk of being left behind. Our collective efforts are not approaching the scale we need to deliver the SDGs by 2030. In fact, by some estimates, we'll only get halfway to our goals at the current pace. For that reason, we have this year launched a decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. With only 10 years left before the 2030 deadline, there is an urgent need to step up action. And every nation, every community, and every person can and must make a contribution. The decade of action calls on governments, businesses, civil society, and individuals everywhere to combine to create unstoppable momentum for the goals. The recipe is clear. First, to mobilize everyone around a common effort. Second, to demand urgency and action and to hold leaders to account. And third, to supercharge ideas so that they become sustainable solutions. We need to identify what works and scale up solutions and investments so that we reach all the people on the planet. In all of these, the mobilization of finance to fill the gap of some $2.5 to $3 trillion a year is critical. In a period where official development assistance has been decreasing, together with private foreign investment in the developing world, it is absolutely essential that developed nations deliver on the commitment made in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the Paris Agreement. On the other hand, it's important to support developing member states in their capacity to mobilize domestic resources through improved governance and tax reforms. But the success of national efforts also requires the international community to be more effective in clamping down on illicit financial flows, money laundering, and tax evasion. At the same time, we need innovative financial tools to help in de-risking private investment and in the developing world to channel more stronger resources to achieve the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe we can be the generation that ends poverty and hunger and conquers injustice and inequality. But it is not going to be easy. We face multiple obstacles. Geopolitical tensions are higher, and they have been for years, and unpredictable changes in power relations in a chaotic world are placing a strain on the multilateral system that has largely kept the world safe for the past 75 years. Global mistrust, due to the growing inequality and unfair globalization, is growing not only between nations, but between peoples and their leaders. We also have to address the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution and make sure we embrace the benefits while minimizing the risks posed to human rights and equity around the world. But finally, and central to the discussion today, there is the climate emergency. This is the threat that I believe is most grave and most urgent, yet it is something I am convinced we can tackle if only we can generate the political will and the unity we need to make a difference. Climate disruption is a clear and present danger worldwide, but let us for a minute look at it through the lens of Pakistan. Like other developing countries, Pakistan has contributed little to the problem, yet faces disproportionate vulnerability because of it. In the past decade, Pakistan has lost some 10,000 lives to climate-related disasters, including 1,200 who died due to a terrible heatwave in Karachi in 2015. The Indus Valley is vulnerable to flooding, and low-lying coastal communities face the prospect of being swamped by rising sea levels. And currently the country is enduring the risk of a locust emergency triggered by climate disruption. Global warming is leading to global swarming. But the biggest worry for Pakistan is water. This is true for all the people of Central, South and East Asia. We rely on the water towers of the Himalaya. Pakistan's smallholder farmers, who represent more than 40% of the labor force, produce 90% of the nation's food supply and generate 75% of the country's export revenue. They depend on rainfall and on irrigation from rivers fed by receding mountain glaciers. In fact, 80% of Pakistan's water use is for agriculture, and it is under threat. Pakistan is one of the 15 most water-stressed countries in the world. As temperatures rise and glaciers melt, Pakistan's goals for reducing poverty and guaranteeing food security are put at risk. And Pakistan is not alone. The same story is mirrored across the globe. We see it in the droughts which threaten the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, and the wildfires that have caused so much suffering both in Australia and the United States. No country is immune. And that is why I'm constantly urging global leaders to act on climate change before it is too late. Sadly, after the success of the Paris conference in 2015, our momentum has stalled. COP25 in Madrid was a disappointment. Our planet is burning, but too many decision makers continue to fiddle. The only answer is decisive climate action by governments, businesses and investors, mayors and governors, and citizens everywhere. Gradual approaches are no longer enough. And the next climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow, governments must deliver the transformational change our world needs and that people demand with much stronger ambition. ambition on mitigation, but also, as we see with the needs of Pakistan and many other developing countries, ambition on adaptation and ambition on finance. Every city, region, bank, pension fund and industry must completely reimagine how they operate. Our goal must be to keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. This is what the scientific community tells us is the only way to avert runaway climate change. And to do that, the world needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And the main obligation rests on the major emitters. And there was a map that shows them. Those countries that contribute most to this crisis must lead the way, not least by phasing out coal and ending perverse fossil fuel subsidies. But all countries can and must play a role. I commend Prime Minister Imran Khan for highlighting climate change at the United Nations General Debate last September, and I congratulate Pakistan on becoming co-chair of the Green Climate Fund. And I also welcome the initiatives such as the 10 billion Treat Tsunami campaign and the government's Clean and Green Pakistan movement. I have to say that I was extremely well impressed when I've heard that Pakistan had decided in Islamabad to abolish plastic bags, and that will be the same everywhere. Plastic pollution is today one of the central concerns that we have, especially for the protection of our oceans. And sometimes people are a little bit reluctant of it, but for those that are reluctant, I have a solution here, which is to use bags like these, which is a UN non-plastic bag, to go to the supermarket. Such local initiatives are essential, and they should be reflected and supported across the planet where appropriate. But ultimately, the answer to the global climate crisis will come from global solidarity backed by global action. We are in a battle for our lives. Our sustainable future is at stake, but I firmly believe it is a battle that can be won. Technology is on our side. We have all the tools and knowledge we need to move from the grey economy to the green economy, as it was seen in the slide. We have the Paris Agreement on climate change, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have the most engaged and mobilized generation of young people in history, a group that is simply not going to accept the current situation. The history of humanity is one of progress. I believe the trajectory is inexorable. So as we look ahead to 2030, let us look ahead with optimism and determination, knowing that we have overcome great challenges before, and we will surely do so again. Thank you very much, and best success for your program.
अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के सेक्रेटरी जनरल एंटोनियो गुतेरेस इस्लामाबाद में मौसमियाती तब्दीली के हवाले से तकरीब से खिताब कर रहे हैं और उनका कहना है कि पाकिस्तान मौसमियाती तब्दीलियों से मुतासर होने वाला बड़ा मुल्क है। तालीम, मईशत और बराबरी तरक्की के लिए अहम है। हमारा मुश्तरका विजन मौसमियाती तब्दीलियों से निमटना है। पायदार तरक्की के अहदाफ का हुसूल तमाम ममालिक के लिए ज़रूरी है।
इस्लामाबाद में मौसमियाती तब्दीलियों से मुतालिक तकरीब जारी है और अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के सेक्रेटरी जनरल सवालों के जवाब दे रहे हैं।
Like from India, so the water crisis is Pakistan is growing. Given that we are a riparian country, a lot of the people's livelihood depend on agriculture. So how can the UN play a role in conflict resolution?
Well, there was an agreement between India and Pakistan, and there is a system in which the World Bank, the World Bank is involved. And obviously, what I would ask the two countries is to have a clear cooperation in relation to water. And I have some moral authority. I was Prime Minister of Portugal when we established an agreement with Spain. It is probably one of the landmark agreements of common water management of two countries. Our rivers come from Spain. And it was possible to have an agreement between the two countries on the common management of our rivers. And I think this example shows that with effective cooperation and dialogue, all these problems can and must be solved. Because if one country thinks that solving the problem and letting the others in a bad situation, it's a good thing, it is not. Because in the end, then things turn against everybody. So it is clear that water must be an instrument of peace and not an instrument of conflict.
Thank you.
I think the Excellency pointed out in his speech also that, water is the critical issue to climate change. And with Pakistan and India, the problem is that we have this treaty called the Indus Water Treaty. It was, negotiated in the 1960s. There are two main aspects which are missing in that. The first and the most important one is climate variance. Now, under the Indus Water Treaty, the water that comes in, there are two main sources, monsoons and the glaciers. And both are affected by climate change now. But we have not discussed this climate variance. It needs to be discussed. And the other aspect is the aquifer that I talked about. This is an aquifer we share with India. It is not a part of the treaty. So, because the drawdown is so large, it started getting affected. So I think there needs to be a dialogue on this, but, at the moment, there's no chance with what is happening right now.
Next question. Okay, for the gender balance, the gentleman with a red tie. Mike, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Zahid Latif Khan, and I represent the capital market of Pakistan. It was quite heartening to listen to your speech, Excellency Antonio, that you mentioned that although Pakistan is getting affected from the environmental hazards, but it's not contributing towards the environment world over. So actually we have seen that internationally there are a few countries which have got the carbon exchange, carbon credit exchange. So I was just wondering that because of the lack of resources in Pakistan, how United Nations can help in establishing this sort of a thing so that people become more responsible in using the carbon emission. So this is my question. Thank you.
One of the things that my new special envoy, that starts with March, Mark Carney, has been trying to mobilize in his function today as governor of a central bank, is to mobilize all central banks in the world to establish new rules for the financial sector to be able to disclose the climate-related risks of financial operations. Today we have a disclosure of risks for reasons that are essentially economic. It's necessary to translate the reality of climate into the financial risks. On the other hand, we have been working hard. I created a coalition of CEOs of especially asset management funds. We are working hard with pension funds and with others, and I believe there are many of these funds in Pakistan, in order to make sure that their portfolios shift. The portfolios of the funds that are working with us are still, at the present moment, are still compatible, according to the companies that they represent, to an increase of temperature at the end of the century to 3 to 4 degrees, which means that it is in the interests of us all that asset managers make a shift, progressive shift to the green economy in their portfolios. And I would say that, if I may be a little bit brutal, there is a good reason for that. It is clear that assets related to the brown economy, namely some aspects of fossil fuels, in the future, their value will inevitably decrease. And so it makes sense from the point of view, for instance, of a pension fund to protect the pension money of the people involved, to get rid of those assets that will tend to decrease in its value, and to bet in the assets that will increase its value, as it is the case of those related to the green economy. I have made personally a small investment in a fund, the Green Fund, and I have to say that that Green Fund is growing much more quickly than all the other small investments that I made, which means that the green economy is now the good economy. And it means that the financial sector is becoming, very interestingly, a driver pushing governments to change regulations, pushing governments, because some of these things require government regulations, pushing governments to assume more clearly responsibilities in this regard. So I'm very hopeful that the financial sector will become more and more an ally in climate action, based not on, in some cases based on, I would say, even a generous approach, because more and more companies and banks and institutions feel that their staff is concerned about climate action, that the children of those CEOs are concerned about these things. So there is a shift that is authentic. But then there is enlightened self-interest. Why to bet in things that have no future? No. The logic of business is to invest in the economy that has a future. And the economy that has a future is a green economy, not a brown economy.
Thank you. Next question, the gentleman in the paisley tie. Oh, sorry, striped tie.
Thank you. Your Excellency, welcome to Islamabad and Pakistan. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Paris Agreement gave us a lot of hope.
Mike, Mike.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of hope with the Paris Agreement. But for a lot of us in Pakistan and across the world, that hope is quickly turning to fear and tragedy. Given what's happening with the climate talks, we've seen disappointment after disappointment. How long do you think we can continue to base our collective hopes on climate negotiations that are led by some countries who've got different means of going about the negotiations? I guess my question to you is, climate is being disrupted. Is there a disruption? Is there a disruption needed within the climate talks, within the climate negotiations process, to move things forward? Thank you.
Well, it is true, if one looks at Madrid, that today governments are to a certain extent lagging behind what is happening in societies. But it is also true that the pressure is mounting, and is mounting for a number of reasons. First, there are economic reasons. The green economy is becoming the most profitable one. My country, Portugal, has launched recently a bid for solar energy, for a number of plants of solar energy. And they got in the proposals for that bid the cheapest price ever for electricity anywhere from whatever source. No, so it is clear, and much cheaper than coal and much cheaper than natural gas, that my country is closing the coal plants, one in 2021, the other in 2023. Natural gas will still remain part as a kind of a system of equilibrium of the network, but the bet has been in the renewables. And they got now prices that are astounding. I think, if I remember well, $14 per megawatt hour. But these I'm not so sure, it's just by memory. Which means that, to invest in fossil fuel production of energy is a mistake for the future. It is to have more expensive electricity in the future, which doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, we see that in all other areas, the green economy is becoming the most attractive. So there is a pressure I mentioned from the financial sectors. On the other hand, in Europe, 2 years ago, and I speak for Europe because it's in my area, 2 years ago, all the elections, the key factor was migration. Last year, the key factor was climate. So public opinions are starting to put a lot of pressure on governments in relation to climate. And it's very interesting that because of that, the European governments have now committed, with the exception of Poland, but I hope that this problem will also be solved, to the carbon neutrality in 2050. Because the pressure of the electorate, was very clear. On the other hand, the movements of the civil society, the youth movement, is enormous. And I am quite convinced that we will witness in the next 1, 2, 3 years a much stronger commitment of governments to move forward. And I hope that it will be possible to translate it already in Glasgow. The key is the big emitters. And it's absolutely, more than 70 countries have committed already to carbon neutrality. But they represent only 15% of the emissions. The big emitters need to commit to the same objective. And we need now to do everything possible to make sure that the big emitters also assume that responsibility. And I think that there is also a growing conscience that in their countries that is needed. So we are not yet there. We are still losing the battle, but I think that the conditions are starting to be created for us to win the war.
Thank you. Next question. The lady in the blue. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the women now.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Saida Hadika Jamshed and I'm working on carbon market project in Pakistan.
On?
Carbon markets in Pakistan. And I have a question for Honorable Secretary General. The developed countries are failing to keep their climate finance pledge of 100 billion each year. And without it, developing countries will not be able to cope up with the climate change impacts. So how exactly is the international community planning to ensure that this promise is fulfilled?
Now, the question is to make sure that the commitments that were made, in particular the commitments to adaptation, are met. And this is what, as I said, we still need the clarification, and I hope that in Glasgow that clarification will be real. We are seeing also the mobilization of resources beyond that. We are seeing all the international financial institutions investing more and more money in these. We are seeing a big success, for instance, in green bonds everywhere. So I think there are reasons for hope beyond that. But one thing is clear, there were commitments made in Paris, namely by the developed countries. Those commitments need to be met in a transparent way.
Would you like to add? Okay, next question. The gentleman in the yellow tie. Yes.
Excellency, thank you very much. On behalf of the business community of Pakistan, I want to thank you for the sentiments expressed for the people of Pakistan. We love you too, sir. And sir, to achieve sustainable development, peace and security is a must. Peace and security is a must to achieve SDGs. Now, what is happening in Kashmir, it is affecting our economy, our business, and 220 million people, they have been waiting to listen to you, and those in Kashmir are expecting that you would play a role to ease their lives. It's 197 days that they are under oppression. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I've always been strongly advocating the need for an enhanced dialogue between India and Pakistan, and even offered my good offices more than once. Good offices can only be implemented if they are accepted by both parties. And we have been expressing very clearly the absolute need for human rights to be fully respected in Kashmir. By the way, if there has been any solid contribution for that, are the two reports that were presented by the Human Rights High Commissioner on the situation that I believe have had a very important role in clarifying the situation. So our strong commitment is clear. Human rights.
सेक्रेटरी जनरल अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा अंतोनियो गुतेरेस सवालों के जवाब दे रहे हैं। अभी के लिए इतना ही। एक ब्रेक के बाद हाजिर होंगे हेडलाइंस के साथ।
आप देखते रहिए समा।